I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Movie Star Magic. And this week we're going to be looking at the career of Meryl Streep. In the first half of the video, I'll be talking about her sort of career arc, how she sort of emerged as this Oscar queen, and then actually how she developed into a mainstream movie star. And then the second half of the video, talking about her defining feature, trying to understand what makes her great as an actor. What is the actor's role in making a movie great, and what are they bringing to the movie that the director or the writer or the other people a part of the production are not. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is break down an actor's career, talk about their career in sort of 3 different chapters with a defining role in each chapter, so we can sort of understand their complete career arc, and then in the second half trying to figure out a defining feature, what makes them great. And Meryl Streep is one of those actors who's considered one of the greatest of all time, and will probably be the most well-respected actor that we cover on this series, because for the most part I wanted to cover different interesting choices. So I'm not going to cover Tom Cruise or Robert Redford or Jack Nicholson. That being said, even though I'm covering someone like a Meryl Streep, the interesting thing about it to me is just how fascinating of a career she has. That when I sort of knew about her, I knew about her in the 3rd chapter, in the sort of Devil Wears Prada comedy chapter, whereas, she's been known to be this Oscar sensation for years. But I hadn't really seen a lot of those movies, and I think a lot of people maybe haven't seen all those movies. You have movies like the French Lieutenant's Woman and Evil Angels, where just sort of underseen, under-discussed movies, despite her, getting nominations for them. Even something like Out of Africa, I think is maybe a little bit of a less appreciated Best Picture winner, yet she was a huge star of that. So, there's reasons why, and an interesting sort of element of myself going back and seeing all these movies and trying to understand her place in them. I think it's a really fascinating thing that necessarily hasn't been explored. But jumping into that, it is fascinating to talk about her first chapter, which I am going to call the Queen of the Oscars. Early on, her first on-screen live-action role, she's in a movie in 1977, and then in 1978 she has The Deer Hunter, which wins Best Picture, and she gets nominated for Best Supporting Actor. And then the next year in 78 she's in Kramer vs. Kramer, which also wins Best Picture, which actually wins her an Oscar. And then a couple years later, she wins again for Sophie's Choice. And really in this period, which I would sort of dictate from 78 to 90, ending off sort of Postcards from an Edge, that's a total of 13 years, in which 9 of those years she was nominated for an Oscar. So it's a fascinating thing where almost every single year we're getting a Meryl Streep nomination. So we go from her being in her first movie and then getting nominated, that movie winning Best Picture, and then eventually winning a couple of Oscars in a row, and sort of just anointing her like, this is our movie star. This will be the sort of prestige kind of a movie star. This is not someone that's going to sort of transition and try to be in an action movie. She's going to do these sort of small dramatic movies there and get Oscars that are going to give her Oscar wins. And she was sort of the prestige movie star. A lot of her movies didn't make a lot of money. They made their money back, but it was sort of in the assumption that this is probably going to get us awards, or at least hopefully. And like I mentioned before, this period, despite those Oscar nominations, actually has given her a really fascinating career, because you look back at these nominations and The French Lieutenant's Woman and Evil Angels and Ironweed, and you kind of go like, what are these movies? Like, why'd she get nominated for them? Why do they have no cultural lasting standpoint? Is she just really good in them? Is that why did those movies get nominations? And we sort of tried to understand that from a career perspective. Why was she nominated for those? And sort of what I did and what I understood is just the fact that she was very beloved at this time, and that she was getting nominated every year just because they liked her, even more so than these sort of prestige type drama movies that she was in. So of these ones in the sort of 80s period for Meryl, some resonate and some last and some don't. But I think one that does last, and I do think is her defining role in this period, for me at least, is Kramer vs. Kramer. And oftentimes when we're talking about defining roles or actors in great movies, oftentimes they give great performances when there's a great script behind them. All actors sort of say that if you have a great script, you have a great character, you have a great dialogue, it just makes it so much easier, because you're able to get a great actor to elevate an already great material, and then you sort of have sort of this transcendent performance. What's so fascinating about Kramer vs. Kramer, while I do really enjoy the movie, I think her character is extremely underwritten and really one-sided, and it seems like everything that makes this movie, I think, interesting and complex is really brought to by her, particularly when we're talking about her character. You know, this mother who had to abandon her child to sort of find herself, leaving the sort of father and son to have this emotional connection, and then of course she comes back trying to get her kid back. The whole movie is designed and built and structured for you to cheer and root for Dustin Hoffman's character, and you know, for its time, and even so today, I think having this sort of father-son perspective is not one that we always have. It's always that mother-son sort of connection. The mother always sort of knows best. So when we have this sort of complex absentee character, it makes sense for us to, especially because we're spending so much time with Dustin Hoffman, it makes sense for us to sort of hate that character and to not understand that character. But I think what Meryl's so great at doing is, in the sort of few scenes that she has, mostly in the courtroom, is able to give us an understanding of where she was, of this sort of woman who rushed into marriage a little bit too early and sort of had this life dictated and planned out for her, and maybe that's not the life she wanted, and she still needs to explore herself, and that she still had an immense love for her son, but she needed that time off for herself. So even though everything is working against her character, Meryl's able to bring so much to the movie, which I think is brilliant. That she's not this sort of one-dimensional mother character, which, you know, the script, I think, sort of positions her as, but herself as an actor, because of some of her sort of reserved but clearly emotional sort of crying scenes, oftentimes in the courtroom, and some of her sort of strict but also sort of, I think, sentimental line deliveries. She's able to really craft a really unique persona for this movie, and I think actually just delivers what was already going to be a sort of good, rousing kind of a movie, and adds an extra level of complexity, adds a little dimensionality to the movie. And she's the one that is doing that because of her performance, because of the way, like I said, she deliver those lines, because of the way she just sort of does so much with those little scenes, that she's able to sort of give us a little bit more of a backstory, a little bit more of an empathy, especially on those rewatches. She's someone that really stands out for me, and Kramer vs. Kramer, I think, is still one of those movies that will sort of last the test of time, and I think that's in part because of her performance, frankly, even though, you know, she's not one of the main characters of the movie. And then in the second chapter, I'm going to call this the mainstream star. And this is really sort of the chapter in which she helps develop herself as a mainstream movie star, as someone that is not just the sort of prestige Oscar darling whose movies cost $20 million and make $40 million and win a couple of awards. They're more than that. They become sort of, she sort of broadens her horizon in terms of the type of movie she does. It's not just dramas strictly anymore. She starts to get into a different type of genres, comedies, horror comedy, even something like Death Becomes Her, or I'm thinking of Defending Your Life. And then even into the early 2000s, working on, I think, a little bit more eccentric movies, like an adaptation, or just a little bit more of a lighter movie, like Music of the Heart. A lot of these movies are movies that made a lot of money and didn't necessarily always get her the nomination. Death Becomes Her is a visual effects feat. It's not necessarily a performance kind of a feat on her part, but it's a movie that was very beloved and is now a cult classic, and did make money at the box office at the time. However, one movie that I think really made a lot of money at the box office, which is her defining role in this period, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Meryl Streep performance, that being The Bridges of Madison County. Now, this was always sort of, you know, she got nominated for this movie. It is sort of traditional in the sense that this is Clint Eastwood post Unforgiven. Like I mentioned, she got nominated for this movie for the Oscars. But what I think is interesting, why it's a defining role in this sort of mainstream period, is on one hand, it made a lot of money. This was a big smash hit. But what it also did was sort of put her, I think, on the same level as a Clint Eastwood. She's not the star of this sort of traumatized women in this 80s, you know, movie from a European director. No, it's Clint Eastwood. It's Americana. It's Clint Eastwood and Meryl Streep, you know, Oscar winner, and that sort of early Miramax kind of mid-Miramax kind of period where we're finally saying, like, no, the Oscars are a big deal, and we can use this sort of prestige to actually make money at the box office and utilize that in the way that they hadn't before. So I think Meryl Streep, putting her on the same level as Clint Eastwood, just being the same movie, that alone, with it making the box office, sort of checks the box of the mainstream star. However, I really wanted to talk about this movie just because I was really impressed by the movie. I'd seen it a long time ago, didn't remember much about it, but then seeing it again, I was just really surprised at how much I actually really like the post sort of Unforgiven Eastwood period of what I would call sort of a calmness and a stillness to a lot of his movies. Playing a little bit older as Francesca Johnson, an Italian immigrant who moved to Iowa after falling in love with an American GI during World War II, her her kids are growing up now. She's getting a little bit older, reflecting on her life, and falls in love with a National Geographic photographer played by Clint Eastwood, Robert Kincaid, which is just a terrific name. And the movie sort of follows their sort of few days together while the sort of kids are away. Her kids are away, and they kind of kindle a tragic romance. And what I think Meryl's so terrific at doing, I almost called this series the mature mom or the tone setter, because those are two things that she often plays motherly type figures and excels in that. But I want to talk a little bit more about the tone setter factor, the fact that no matter what movie she's in, she has this remarkable ability of just completely understanding the kind of material she's in. In this movie, I could really see it sort of ending up as a melodramatic, almost operatic kind of a tale of lost love, or a reflection from the kid's perspective. But what it is kind of like a photograph of a movie. It is still, it is calm, it is quiet, it's reserved, and I think Meryl completely embodies that. In things just like her line deliveries, or the speed of her movement, or even just certain glances. There's all this sort of small things that ultimately add up to adding to the tone of the film. And oftentimes we credit this with the director, because if a director is able to sort of create a consistent atmosphere or tone, and everyone knows they're in the same movie, then that's sort of a success from the leadership that they were able to sort of successfully show that. But what I think is sort of maybe underrated is the actor's ability to understand that and then implement that into it. She doesn't feel out of place in this movie. I think this is maybe her most transformative role, playing an Italian, even though she doesn't look like an Italian whatsoever. She looks maybe more Polish, German sort of descent. So the fact that she's able to do this, put it on an accent, and give this sense a real person with real history who really has kids and didn't feel just like an actor acting into it. So her ability just to sort of transform in this role in terms of just small things with an accent and some slight physical appearance differences, but her ability just to sort of totally understand the role, totally understand the movie, not just her role, but her role in the overall movie, and then able to sort of slow down her movements in this case because it's more of a still movie. And then of course, many of her classic movies are romance movies, whether it be Defending Your Life or Out of Africa or Heartburn, which is a sneaky favorite of mine, or even Silkwood to a certain respect. They all have this sort of central romance part to it. So I had to mention a movie that focuses on that romance. And she's so great as this romantic lead, but I don't think she's been ever better with Clint Eastwood, just in the sort of tenderness and the shyness that she brings, but also allows to have these sort of small moments of sparks and real connection. There's such a believability and authenticity to it. It really just is, on one hand, a transformative, remarkable performance, but also a performance where you go, she's fitting so well within the movie that she's not only considering her performance as an actor, but her role within the entire movie. And that's a rarity that we see from actors, and she's so terrific in this. And then in the third chapter, I'm going to call this one the fierce independent. I could also call this the later age comedic star. And I really would think, in the sort of early 2000s with a movie like Manchurian Candidate, which she's playing, the more serious elder stateswoman, but really, of course, with 2006 is The Devil Wears Prada, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But that's really the movie where we sort of define her as, she's a comedic star. She can do comedy and do it well. And then from then on, you have, It's Complicated and Hope Springs, and she's opening movies older in her life. Some of the actors we've covered already, when they get older, they sort of age out of that lead role and lead persona, and they sort of go into the more, I would argue, interesting supporting actor kind of elder statesman a role. And she sort of did that early on with kind of Devil Wears Prada, but then we sort of go, hey, she's the best part of this movie. Why isn't she in every movie? So then she becomes the lead of It's Complicated and Hope Springs, and these movies that do very well. And Mamma Mia, of course, I'd have to mention, even though she's less so of a lead, she is sort of playing up that persona and is in these huge box office successes, and I think really helped redefine her as where she was this sort of Oscar darling that didn't make a lot of money, and then mainstream she had a couple of those big hits, Out of Africa, Bridges of Madison County, being in these more genre movies that are less Oscar play, and then in the mid-2000s having almost another career revival, which is why I think she's such a fascinating had such a fascinating career, because really her most successful movies have come in the last 15 or so years. So it's fascinating to see it. And that was always the knock against Meryl, I think, for the longest time, because when we're talking about her, we're talking about the greatest of all time. And when we talk about her, you always go, well, she can't really do funny. You know, she was cute in defending your life and sort of innocent, but she wasn't super funny. Even in Death Becomes Her, I think she sort of gets outclassed by Goldie Hawn and Bruce Willis a little bit. But when we see her in Devil Wears Prada, it's like, nope, Meryl Streep can do no wrong. She can do everything, and she can be the sort of best part of a comedy movie. And I think, you know, follows that up later on with more of the romantic comedy elements, but also comedy parts too. So yeah, in this category, in this chapter, I had to go with the defining role being The Devil Wears Prada. Not much to say that already hasn't been said. It's a total classic. She's the best part of the movie. She totally plays it straight, which adds to the comedic humor of it. And she knows that she's not like sort of clueless in that sense. She knows that by playing it straight, it will add to the comedic element to her. And she just totally chews up and destroys every scene. All of her stuff with her and Emily Blunt in particular are the stuff that I always go back to. So not much to say about this one except from it's a classic. It's one of the most defining Meryl Streep performances. And if we lived in a just world, she would actually probably win an Oscar for this. But now talking about the defining feature of Meryl Streep, I call this video, Meryl Streep the Marvel, because not like a Marvel superhero, but in the sense of the word Marvel, I think she is just marvelous. And I say that because I really do consider her in the sort of pantheon of a Jack Nicholson or Tom Cruise or a Denzel Washington or Katharine Hepburn, these sort of legendary actors. And it's impossible to say, you know, in artistic form, who's the greatest actor of all time. You know, it's so difficult versus something like Tom Brady in the NFL or Michael Jordan in the NBA. However, she does have that sort of reputation among her younger co-workers and just film critics in general. And I think she has that because when you see her acting, there is sort of a marvelous Marvel quality that I always bring and find myself being attached to. Because she's an actor that is not totally transformative, I think, like a Christian Bale, where you literally forget it's Christian Bale in the movie and you just go, this is a great performance. But she's also not like a movie star like Will Smith that just is pretty much the same person in every single movie. What she is able to do is kind of do both. She can be this sort of great movie star, she can do the transformative things, but there's always an element of, I can see that you're acting, but not in a bad way. It's I can see that you're acting, and I can see how well of a job you are doing at this. You're either putting on an accent and transforming, but not totally transforming in terms of a huge physical performance, but in the fact like, oh, I kind of forgot for a second that you're acting here. Or you'll see someone, you know, the classic for me was when I was rewatching and watching all these movies for the first time, I hadn't seen Postcards from the Edge, and there's this one great shot, which is just Meryl Streep. It's just a shot of her face, and you go, oh, okay, that's a simple shot, right? And you can do it, and probably anyone could have set up the shot, but no one ever, I think, in the history of movies could have done what she did in that sort of single shot, in which the themes of the movie are conveyed within a couple of facial expressions in this sort of 30-second scene, in which we see her have this sort of intense admiration for her mother, but then also the realization that she is kind of the root of a lot of her problems, and the sort of narcissism that her mother has overshadowed and creeped into her own self-confidence. And it's in this realization within this just one shot that she's able to bring. Now, Mike Nichols is a talented filmmaker. She's worked with them a bunch of times, but Mike Nichols doesn't have to do anything in that sense. He just has to put up the camera in front of Meryl's face, and she will tell the audience the story in that. But she's not someone that's sort of transforming and is totally lost in her roles. That's a classic scene for me because it goes, oh, I recognize what she's doing. She's doing such a great job at it, and I'm recognizing that as well. I recognize not only that she's acting, but that she's acting very well, which makes her feel such like a great actor, one of the greatest actors of all time. Not only because she makes it so easy for an audience to understand and empathize and sort of comprehend what she's doing and how well she's doing at it. So just her ability, just, you know, like I said, to tone set, to play comedies, to do dramas, to do supporting roles, to do sort of serious stuff, elder stateswoman, but also to have a lot of fun in a movie like Mamma Mia. She really can do it all, and I think that's another element to her, is that she can do all these different types of movie star roles, charming roles, romantic stuff, and really have if you haven't seen a Meryl Streep movie that you have liked, you haven't seen enough Meryl Streep movies, because I can guarantee there is one for you. So it was a great time looking back at her career, and like I said, I called this one the Meryl just because what I think she brings in her ability at every movie is just to have the audience, to communicate to the audience how well of a job she's doing and just marvel at it. But that's about it for the show. Thank you for watching. Please let me know your favorite Meryl Streep movie, maybe an underrated one. There was a few ones that I saw that surprised me. Something like A Heartburn, I think, is a very underrated. Based on Nora Ephron, directed by Mike Nichols. With Jack Nicholson. I thought that was a funny sort of New York type kind of a comedy, drama, tragedy element. That was a lot of fun. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.